Ladies and gentlemen, Jay Weidner is called by Wired Magazine an authority on Hermetic and alchemical traditions and erudite conspiracy hunter. Jay Weidner is a renowned author, filmmaker, and Hermetic scholar, considered to be a modern-day Indiana Jones. Without further ado, let's welcome to the show my pal, Jay Weidner. Jay, how are you doing, sir?
Doing great, David. How are you?
Excellent. Wow, Angie, I'm so excited. I know you are too, to have Jay on the show. What do you think about this?
I'm very excited. So I'm ready to get into this.
Cool. Well, Jay, we want to talk about a few things. Obviously, you're an expert on Stanley Kubrick, his association with the Central Intelligence Agency, his believed work perhaps on directing the moon landing. We want to go over The Shining a little bit. And then we also want to talk about his later works before his untimely passing, and how that movie all tied in with the Illuminati. And some people believe there's a lot more to it than just meets the eye, what we saw in the theaters. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background. Most of us already, of course, know who you are. You're a legend. But for some of the new people, give us a little short, intro and just have at it, and we'll ask you some questions.
Well, probably the least favorite thing I like to talk about is myself, so I'll make it really short. I'm a very lucky guy who got a lot of breaks and made some interesting films and met a lot of interesting people and wrote a couple of very good books. And I have my own theories on reality, and I'm happy to share them with you.
Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit. Let's start off with Stanley Kubrick and his association with 2001, and then how that ties in with the Central Intelligence meeting with him, and some of the stuff that your average American just doesn't really know until they hear it from an expert like you.
Well, I mean, the whole idea that you could go to the moon in 1969 and then, stop going in 1972 and then never do it again is really preposterous, because everything gets easier the more you do it. So there's Charles Lindbergh went from New York to Paris in a single flight, which was completely unheard of, and nobody thought you could do it. And 5 years later, there were hundreds of people making that same flight. So once we figure out how to do things, it becomes easier and easier to do it. But only in every instance but the moon landing. In the moon landing, we've actually gone backwards. NASA now is making statements that we can't get into the Van Allen belts, the belts that surround the Earth, because it's too radioactive and dangerous. Yet 12 men did go, or no, actually 14 men, 21 men went, if you consider all 3 astronauts and the 7 missions, so including Apollo 13, because it had to go through 2. So 21 men went through the most supposedly highly radioactive field on Earth, so hot that it would fry anything in just seconds. And they didn't go, and they all lived. Nobody died. Further tests have shown that actually it's even more radioactive out there than we ever thought. So outside of low Earth orbit, it is like super hot, and I don't even think that interplanetary travel is even going to be possible unless they do something. But at this stage, NASA itself is saying it can't get to the moon, even though they keep promising every 3 or 4 years from now, we're going in 2022, we're going in 2025, and they keep putting it off. And of course, they don't have the technology, and they never did. And that's the poor fact of the matter. Now,
where's all the telemetry data they lost? Supposedly, explained it. They lost everything.
140,000 video, 2-inch video reels were taped over by NASA the most important mission supposedly ever on Earth, and NASA can't afford to buy videotape and not wreck all of their. But here's the thing: let's get back to the Van Allen belts. If they did go through the Van Allen belt, then for sure they took a Geiger counter with them to get readings. Where are those readings? Isn't that kind of important to see what kind of radiation those guys experienced? Wouldn't that be very useful information? Yet there are no Geiger counter readings, as if they didn't even take one with them. I mean, I don't know if they did or they didn't, but we have no, who would go into a highly radioactive area like, say, Fukushima without a Geiger counter? Come on. It doesn't make any sense. So in fact, the more you dig into the whole subject, the less and less sense it makes. The astronauts can't even agree whether they can see stars from space or not. In the press conference on Apollo 11, where the 3 astronauts are trotted out and they look like their dad or their dog just died, like they want to be there about as much as they want to sit on a bed of hot crystals, and they directly contradict themselves. Aldrin says you can see the stars. Collins says you can't. Over and over and over. And there's a famous children's TV show with Buzz Aldrin, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. He was pretty elderly at the time. And the little girl, cute little girl, goes, "Mr. Aldrin, how come we went to the moon all those times and now we aren't going back?" And Buzz Aldrin, maybe he couldn't lie to a little girl, I don't know, but he looks right at the little girl and goes, "That's because we didn't go." I mean, and it's on YouTube, you can see it.
I've heard it.
I'm sure you guys may have even seen it. And so we, over and over and over again, we see Neil Armstrong. We come to find out that there's one photograph of Neil Armstrong supposedly on the moon. One. All the rest are Buzz Aldrin. And so you ask yourself, well, wonder why that is. And then you start looking into Neil Armstrong's life, and you find out he's deeply religious, and he probably wasn't very comfortable. He never did interviews or hardly did any interviews after he came back. He could have ran for Senate, president, probably would have won. He was a big national hero, but instead he went to his Ohio ranch and just basically lived the rest of his life in quiet. And you find out actually he was a pretty good guy. He probably thought that they were really going to the moon until the very last second when they said, well, we're not going to do it. And so you're going to go on this set and you're going to act like you were on the moon. And he probably didn't like it. Buzz Aldrin is kind of a psychopath. He doesn't care, but I think Neil Armstrong actually didn't want to do this. And then he slunk away, when he could have traded it in for a high paying job somewhere. And he didn't want that either, because he didn't want to be in the open. He didn't want to have people talking to him on an everyday basis. So the big question when I first came out with my Stanley Kubrick theories was, well, he was shooting 2001 at Pinewood Studios in London. And so, and we know, I know that he shot 2001 as a research and development project for shooting the NASA footage. He wanted to know how to do it exactly. So he made a movie of having to do it. And then he became the #1 guy for knowing how to do it. But one of the main criticisms, and one I couldn't answer until recently, was that he didn't have a set. There's no set at Pinewood that's big enough for the moon sets. And so how do you explain that, Jay? And I'm like, I was, bewildered, could not really figure out where the hell he found a set that big. And then information came out about 2 years ago where a guy in a little town 40 minutes north of London, 40 minutes north of where Stanley Kubrick lived, was a blimp hangar, gigantic, huge blimp hangar. Hang 2 blimps could sit in this hangar, and it's just gigantic. It's like it still exists. It is now a movie studio. They've turned it into a movie studio, and it turned into a movie studio about 2 years after, I believe, Kubrick filmed the Apollo stuff, which would be May, June, July of 1968. Right after he finished 2001: A Space Odyssey, he then took all of his knowledge, they went to the blimp hangar, and they shot all this footage because a witness actually saw Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong at the blimp hangar in around that time period. So we kind of know now where it was filmed, and we know that Stanley Kubrick liked to sleep in his own bed at night. So it was always a question. It had to be somewhere, within a close enough drive to his house, or he wouldn't have wanted to do it. And there it was, 40 minutes north of where he lived was his blimp hangar, which is, like I said, now they built the entire Gotham City in the Dark Knight series by Christopher Nolan in this blimp hangar. They literally built a city. That's how big it is. And
Wow.
and so the evidence is mounting more and more that we didn't go. We don't have the technology to go. There's no reason they would burn the blueprints to the Saturn V. There's no reason that they get rid of 140,000 telemetry data tapes. There's no way that they would get rid of all of this material unless it's a lie. That's the only reason you would do this. I used to be an investigative journalist. The first thing you look for is evidence disappearing. And then you look for who's making the evidence disappear. And NASA is making the evidence disappear, and they're behind it. And, I know they don't like me, and I'm sorry, but I don't know what you did with the 30 billion, which would be like 200 billion, maybe even more in today's dollars. But somewhere that 30 billion that they spent going to the moon vanished, because I guarantee you the sets, the technicians, and the actors are not going to cost you in 1969 more than $20 million, $30 million at the most. That was a lot of money in those days. So that's the way you have to look at it. It's a cover-up. It's a gigantic cover-up. And the reason it's a cover-up is because it's a very improbable thing trying to get to the moon. So it's not an easy thing to do. And it's a dangerous friggin' place, outer space is. Anything outside of our atmosphere is frigging dangerous. There's little micro meteorites flying by at 16,000 miles an hour. There's all sorts of terrible danger out there, and NASA knows it. The Russians know it. The Chinese know it. Everybody knows it. And it can only be that there's just one big club of these nations, and they're all working in unison to create this fakery. And here's the thing. To me, the reason that I find this almost criminal is because you should never fake science. Science has always got to be the logical examination of a subject, and you can't fake it. If you fake it, then you're causing damage to your profession.
Of course.
And that's why it's so aggravating to follow this line, because you're watching scientists talk to you and spout things that you know are not true. But how do you tell a guy who's got a master's degree in physics that what you just said is not true? That you can't go out into deep space, that it's a Star Trek fantasy. You need, by NASA's own account, you need 2 meters thick of lead to survive outside of low Earth orbit. 2 meters thick, that's 6 feet, over 6 feet of lead. You know how much that would weigh? Just getting that up into space would cost you hundreds of, I don't know, it's impossible. And like everything else, it just becomes impossible. And so, then you start thinking about other things. You start looking at the ISIS space station, and you see the way it's built, and you say to yourself, I would never build something where a micrometeorite could penetrate the hull of the ISIS space station, there's no interlocking doors, is what I'm saying. Like on submarines, they have doors that, you know, if a wall breaks, you can shut the door and stop the water from getting in, right? You have these hull breaks that you need to have in these dangerous kinds of situations. But the ISIS station is completely open. So if one area decompresses, it all decompresses. There's no saving. It's just, it's like, you don't really expect me to believe that you're that dumb, do you? And I guess that they do. I mean, you know, recently.
I got a question for you.
Go ahead. In
regards to the ISS, I'm kind of glad, you know, I didn't know that you actually, you know, have this kind of an opinion of modern day NASA, because I'm on the same page with you, and I'm sure you've tangled with a few flat earthers before, and I know that you probably don't subscribe to it, so I don't want to go there because there's so many things we do actually agree upon. And when it comes to, you just brought up the water, they do all their training for the ISS underwater. And have you seen the footage where there's like a guy with a scoop? There's one video out that's a real video. They accidentally didn't CGI out a scuba diver in the practice session. They turned the practice session underwater. They left little bubbles. They call bubbles in space is one of the videos. It's all harnesses, screen, and underwater training that they try to pass off as real. The ISS goes 17,000 miles an hour. Nobody's ever seen it built. So, like, you know, how it just doesn't add up.
Well, it's if you actually got somebody like from the Central Intelligence Agency and you pointed all that out, which I have, they will tell you that they would not. We would never show what we really have to anybody. So yes, we're showing you fake. That's what they say about the moon landings too, by the way. Of course, we said we showed you fake stuff because you think we want the Russians to see what we have, you know, because they're in the Cold War. And it's a good answer. I mean, it's hard, you can't argue with it. It's sort of like it's a circular logic, so you know you can't argue with it. So that's their new fallback. What do they call it? Limited hangout. So the limited hangout now is, yes, they're faking the ISIS footage because we don't want anyone, the Russians don't want anyone to see what we have. And then, oh yeah, we faked the moon landing footage because we don't want anyone to see what we really have. And so, you know, you just, what can you do about it? There's nothing you can do about it. I will tell you this. The moon landing being faked story is beginning to win. I don't know if we're past the 50-50 mark yet, but we're closing in on 50-50, and soon we'll pass it. And pretty soon it's going to be 65-35, then 70-30, and then 80-20. That's where it's going to go, because right now it must be about 10 books in the last 2 years have been written about, you know, the faking and how it was. And some are by really smart scientists who are like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so it's crashing. And every year that NASA doesn't go back to the moon after promising, it just gets worse and worse. And so as far as I'm concerned, the argument's over. This side won and their side lost. And but they can never admit it, because if they admit it, then they have to admit to something far worse than just faking the moon landings. They have to admit to giving us nonsense designed as science for the last 50, 60 years, almost.
What about the
sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nancy. No, go ahead.
They say back in the 1960s that they would have to actually detonate a nuclear bomb to get through the Van Allen belt.
No, but they did Operation, oh boy, I think it was called, I can't remember the operation, but they really did send nukes up into the Van Allen belts and blew them off. And this only increased the radiation that was out there. It didn't decrease. They thought they could blow a hole through it. Pardon me?
I believe it's Operation Fishbowl.
That's it. Yeah, that's right. And then they sent the Geiger counter up there, and the thing was like off the charts. It was like, oh my God, we really blew it. So it's even worse. So they made it, and this is before Apollo. So this was like in 61 or 62 or something, if they even did it, who knows. But because I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff.
Hey, what do you think about Challenger? Have you followed the Challenger theory? And everybody has
it. They're all alive. Yeah.
What do you think about? Did you see the video where the young gentleman went out to visit one of the professors from Wisconsin? He looks exactly like what do you think?
It's him. That's them. They all lived. So then the question is, well, what the heck was going on there, right? What why fake it? Why fake it? So clearly, the explosion was seen from the Bay Area. I think also Texas, maybe, streaking across the sky right at that moment. So we know there was something up that did happen because many witnesses saw it. So then they did blow something up. So why? I mean, so it must not have been manned. And so if it wasn't manned, I mean, I really don't get it. Is it that fake where they're sending up just fake people? And I don't know, man, but that video is rather shocking. But in that video, just so you people that don't know, a German guy goes and actually tracks down the people that supposedly died in the Challenger accident. They're all still alive. So it's like,
it's amazing.
It is amazing. I mean, there's so many weird things, there's
what about astronauts gone wild? Could you tell the audience a little bit about Bart Sibrel and your relationship with him and that astronauts gone wild? That is very shocking.
Yeah, Bart must have cojones the size of basketballs. Bart took his camera and went to various astronauts with a Bible and asked them to put their hand on the Bible and say that they'd really been to the moon. And he never got one astronaut to do it, but he did get punched in the mouth by Buzz Aldrin, and he got a death threat from Ed Mitchell and Ed Mitchell's son, who told him that they were going to get the CIA out to kill him. And but in the end, if you went to the moon, you just put your hand on the Bible and say, yeah, I went to the moon, so what? Big deal, right? But nobody would do it.
He purposely gave him that footage. The story is that he got a FOIA request, or he tried to get some footage. They sent him some footage. They sent him the wrong package, and they basically they gave him the footage that exposed them faking flying around in low Earth orbit as opposed to being like near the moon. So how does that happen?
That was somebody in NASA that did that on purpose. I'm absolutely sure of it, because I've talked to people in NASA and they want it out. And I mean, it was somebody from NASA that told me, all of this years ago, long before I figured out the Stanley Kubrick angle. But there's just, there's just so much weirdness around the whole thing.
What about The Shining? Incorporate The Shining and Kubrick and how he laid out all these clues and why he did that. That's pretty interesting stuff that I don't even know all of it. It's very fascinating.
Yeah. So my view of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is that every time that he deviates from the Stephen King novel, which is quite a bit, drove Stephen King out of his mind, he's telling us about what he went through personally doing the Apollo moon landings. So we have, the scene of Danny on his trike, or no, Danny playing with his toys, and a little ball rolls up and he stands up and he's got the Apollo 11 rocket on his sweater taking off, and he walks down the hallway to room 237. And the moon at that time of making 2001, it was thought to be exactly 237,000 miles away as a mean distance. And Wendy discovering the book that Jack's writing. If you remember, Jack is writing a book and he doesn't want Wendy coming around while he's working on his secret book, right? And then Wendy breaks into his writing place and sees the book, and it's all just one sentence written over and over: all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And then I point out that the all in the font type of the typewriter that Jack is using. It really looks like A11. The L's look like ones. So it reads A11, work and no play, makes Jack, and Jack is definitely Stanley Kubrick in The Shining. So it makes Stanley a poor boy. And Wendy sees that Jack's secret project is just this repetition work, right? And that it really isn't anything of, it isn't really anything that's really very good. And then, Jack steps out from behind the wall and says, well, how do you like it? Right. And then she says, we have to get out of here. We have to leave the overlook. And Jack says, don't you have any appreciation of what a contract is? Do you understand what my employers would do to me if I left this place right now? Do you have any idea what you're saying? And that's an argument between Stanley Kubrick and his wife after she discovered his secret project, which was that he was working on the moon project. And she freaked out and he freaked out. And the reason that Halloran, the African-American chef, he's killed in the movie, but in the novel, he actually frees Wendy and Danny. And so why did Kubrick have him killed? Because Kubrick is telling us that he told somebody and that person got killed. And he wanted to make sure that got in there. And so over and over, we see through The Shining, it's a confession of Stanley Kubrick faking the making of The Shining to show you that he faked the moon landings. And he uses 11 or A11 as a symbolic to show you the entire Apollo program. But Apollo 11, being the first one that he had to fake, became really probably the hardest and the most important, because there's another thing about the Apollo footage, which has to be said. If you watch any kind of long-term television series or like a trilogy of movies, like let's say the Star Wars trilogy, the first one, you notice, if you watch, you're a filmmaker, you notice the production values get better and better from each movie because the crew learns. They learn how to do what they're doing. They learn how to work together. They learn how to use the equipment. They have a learning curve. By the time they're done with the first movie, their learning curve is really big. By the time they're done with the second movie, it's all the way at the top. And then the third movie's like got super production values, like Return of the Jedi or Return of the King in the Lord of the Rings series. And you can see the same exact thing happening in the Apollo series. If you can't, because you can't see the footage anymore, but if you could see the footage, then you would see that, Apollo 11 is stark. There's no sets, there's no background, just black background. Apollo 12, we have no footage because they blacked the camera out conveniently. Apollo 13 had an accident supposedly, so that didn't have any footage. So we don't have footage again until Apollo 14, all over 2 years later. So they had like this long period of time to really work things out. And then Apollo 14 got pretty good production values. Apollo 15 is getting better. 16 really good, and of course the 17 is the the coup de grace. It's the ultimate. It's got giant sets and big mountains and vast tundra and driving around in the lunar rover, and so you're just up in the ante with every one. Of course, if you go back in time and you try to explain how they got all that stuff up there in that little flimsy capsule, they can't really tell you. Kubrick, by the way, mocks that in The Shining. There's a famous scene where Jack and Wendy and Danny drive up in their little Volkswagen Beetle up the mountains into Colorado. And they're at the hotel and they're standing in front of their luggage, and their luggage is like 8-9 feet high and like 6 feet wide. There's like 15 suitcases. You're like, yeah, you got that little Volkswagen Beetle, right? And that's Kubrick mocking the whole idea that you could stuff all that equipment into a thing a little bit bigger than a phone booth, and And there's a lot of that humor. There's another scene in The Shining where Danny's riding around on his trike, and he goes by 6 crates of 7-Up, but 7-Up, the soft drink. And of course, NASA's narrative is that 7 went up, but only 6 landed, right? Because Apollo 13 didn't go. So all through the background, if you're watching the movie, there's all these allusions to almost in a way mocking things, mocking the whole thing. But he had to be careful because he knew that they would kill him, and so he disguised it really well. And my personal opinion is that he, in his own mind, he didn't think that the clues in The Shining would be discovered until long after his wife and his daughters were dead. I think he would be very surprised that the secrets of The Shining were uncovered, 11 years after he died. That's when I uncovered him in 2010. Oh, no, 2009. So 10 years after he died is when I sat down and put on my Blu-ray version of The Shining and saw everything that I just described to you, and knew then that Stanley had hidden everything in that movie. And it's a creepy film because of it.
Have you had any pushback or blowback, or have you had any men in black suits visit you and like, hey, we need you to shut up, or are you allowed to talk about that? I'm just curious.
Well, I put out Kubrick's Odyssey in 2011, and then in 2012, I got a call from a very wealthy person who wanted me to fly out to meet him. And I'm sure this guy's, being watched 24/7. So I
Did you?
So he lived in a town in the middle of the country, and my dad, who was elderly at the time. So I said to him, "Listen, I'll come out and meet you, but you have to pay for my flight to go see my dad. So after I visit you, I want to take another flight to go see my dad, and I want you to pay for that flight and the flight back to where I live in Oregon." And he said, "Sure, that's great." So I went to see the guy. We had these very lengthy discussions about some very dark matters. And I got on the plane. I flew to my dad's hometown, and a smaller town in the Midwest. And I rented a car and went out to. My dad lived in the suburbs in this old people's home. He was late 80s at the time, and really nice posh neighborhood, though. My dad had a lot of money, and big driveways, and nobody parked on the street. Everybody parked in the driveway because the driveways were triple wide, and triple car garages, and it's a really upscale neighborhood. So I get there and I say hi to my dad, and I'm sitting in the living room, and I'm talking to him, and all of a sudden I look and I notice there's a car parked out on the street, looking, and a guy looking right through the picture window at me, right? And I'm like, what the hell's this? Because nobody parks on the street in this area. So I kind of give him a closer look. My dad's completely clueless. And I see the guys like looking at me with binoculars through the window. So I say, "Hey, Dad, I got to go to the bathroom. I'll be back in a couple minutes." So I know my dad's got a 44 Louisville Slugger next to the back door. He keeps to hit burglars if they come in, right? So I go to the back door and I pick up his 44 Slugger, and I slink along the side of the house, and so now I'm behind the guy. He can't see me. So I'm in these trees, right? And so then I lift the bat over my head and I start running at the car. I'm going to beat the hell out of the guy's car, right? And I'm running at the guy's car, and he sees me in the rearview mirror. And when I see him see me, I let out a huge war cry. Right? And I'm coming at him, and all of a sudden he starts the car, and he squeals out of there. And I'm sure that I was being followed because of the Stanley Kubrick work.
If you don't mind, can you give us a hint of what department this gentleman was from, and what organization he represents?
I have no idea.
Can you tell us what organization this gentleman comes from?
I couldn't say, but probably NASA or one of their organizations that supports them, like Central Intelligence or Defense Intelligence Agency, those kinds of guys.
Why did you decide to go and see him? Like, did he make an offer you can't refuse, so to speak, or was it intriguing? Like he,
No.
you're not just going to go random guy. I can,
No, but what's happened to me is when I wrote my first two books on alchemy, of which one, my first book, A Monument to the End of Time, by the way, I'm reading on my show Reality Check on YouTube. I'm going to read the entire book. I'm just finished chapter 2. So if you want to read my first incredibly great classic book on alchemy, go to Reality Check on YouTube and you can listen to the first 2 chapters, and I'm going to do all of them. Well, every week I'll do another chapter. But anyway, ever since I wrote those books, I've had this weird thing where very wealthy people want to talk to me. And so they call me up, and I'm like, if you want to talk to me in person, you got to pay for it, and you got to pay me too, because my time is money too. And they always want to talk to me. And I think they think I have the secret of alchemy, the elixir of life, because rich people want to live a long time. Trust me. When you've got $150 million, you're seriously thinking about trying to get to 120 or 140 years old. And in fact, the Silicon Valley rich guys, they're spending all of their personal wealth on longevity and life extension, trying to and they're making some progress. There's been some really serious progress in that. So it's not alchemy is not a fantasy. It's a real thing. They did so in alchemy, they say that until you understand the pineal gland, which is your third eye, you can't really understand alchemy. So I made a big study of the pineal gland. And, there's a study that was done at Princeton in the late 1970s. And what they did was they took the pineal glands, they had a bunch of older rats that are old and ready to die, and a bunch of brand newly born rats that are just entering adolescence. And they took the pineal glands out of the young rats and out of the old rats, and gave the young rats pineal to the old rats, and the old rats pineal to the young rats, and sewed them back up, and watched what happened. The young rats immediately got old and died. The older rats reversed the aging process and got younger. Okay, so this tells me everything I need to know about the elixir of life and alchemy. There really is a way for you to jiggle your pineal gland in a certain way, which causes the right hormones to be released, which causes a reversal of the aging process. So this is all real true stuff and not a fantasy. Unfortunately, my problem with rich people is that attitude is 90% of the game in this thing. So if you've got if you've been a bad person, it really doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to succeed. So alchemy first starts here in the heart, and then it spreads out into the outer world. But unless you're open-hearted and loving, and most rich people aren't, you're not going to go anywhere anyway. So you made your choice. You went for money, and that's what you went for, and that's what you went for. So you're going to die with a lot of money, but that's all that's going to happen. So I tell rich people that, it pisses them off, and they don't want to see me anymore.
That's hilarious. Angie, do you have any questions in regards to the moon landing? I have a space question, but I'd like to, if you have any questions, go right ahead, please.
Actually, I have a question about the alchemy. So, according to legend, the wizards back in the mid-centuries, 14th, 15th, 16th century, were able to do alchemy. Why do you think that we lost that technology until now?
That's interesting. That's what my book that I'm reading is about. How we lost it, what it is, how we lost it. I believe that a very evil force, who I'm not going to name, came into Western history at a certain time, 350 years ago or so, and overturned everything that we had built. And what we had built was amazing. And what escaped me in my two books, but does not escape me anymore, is that alchemy is many things.
Yes.
But one of the most important things that alchemy is to build a device or a construct which draws down the etheric energies. We're swimming in an ocean of invisible energy, which is called the ether. And it is what gives us life. It's called chi or prana in the East. And alchemy is concentrating that chi or that prana or that etheric energy or plasma. Really, it's electrical in nature. And it's about concentrating that. The more you can concentrate it in to your body, the better your health is, and the less you age and all that. So the alchemists would build buildings that were built to bring down all this energy and concentrate it inside the home or the cathedral or the
Eiffel Tower.
Those buildings have been destroyed. I watched a lot of them being destroyed as a young kid in my hometown, which had probably 40 or 50 of these amazing buildings. I've gone back into my hometown, tried to find pictures of these buildings being constructed, blueprints, photographs from newspapers of them. There is none. There's no history of these buildings being built, yet I know they were there because I saw them being torn down, and they were ornate, incredible buildings. And if you look at the Great Fire in Chicago in 1871, you soon discover that it wasn't a cow, Mrs. Leary's cow, knocking over a candle. Whole entire forests north and west of, or east and west of Chicago in Lake Michigan burned. Hundreds and thousands of acres in the most horrendous fire that human race has ever seen. People said that balloons of fire would rain down from the sky. And these fires permeated the United States from 1820 until 1910. And many cities were completely burned to the ground. We're talking stone buildings too, not wooden buildings. The Great Fire of Chicago, those were all stone buildings. How does the stone building burn to the ground? And it happened everywhere. It happened in Boston. It happened in Baltimore. It happened in New York. It happened in Philadelphia. It happened in San Francisco. It happened in Seattle. And over, we can see almost this systematic damage to some kind of culture that was a magical culture that dominated the entire world. These buildings are in China, these buildings are in Japan, these buildings are in Argentina, these buildings are in Russia, they're in Africa, India, they're everywhere. And a lot of them got torn down in India. The British, in the Civil War in India in the 1870s, the British just systematically took dynamite and blew the hell out of the most incredibly beautiful temples, or what they call temples, in India that we have old photographs for, but that's all we have now. And literally from 1820 until 1980, this civilization that existed here was destroyed. The Soviet Union had a Politburo, entire bureaucracy designed to wipe this civilization out of history. All right. And that's because whoever was behind the Soviet Revolution is the group that is, I don't know what to call them, demonic is the only word I can come up with.
So do you think that they're
demonic.
also the ones that have erased our consciousness of Atlantis and of the different, like the pyramids down in South America, with all the knowledge that the Incas, the Aztecs, the Egyptians, all that stuff has been erased from our memories
That's
our
right.
history, do you think that they are the ones who did it too?
Yeah, what they did, Victor always erases the
Yeah.
history and rewrites it. But this group is uh it's going on right now in that country over there next to Russia.
Yep.
That's you go look at that thing. This is a classic example of this evil group. And I'm not going to tell you which side is evil, but there's an evil group that has been running Ukraine for a long time. They deal in human trafficking and bribery and money laundering and a lot worse. They're a horrifying mafia, and that they're representative of this group. This is what this group does, and this group wants to wipe out the former magical civilization that existed here maybe only 200 years ago or so. You have to start questioning all of it, because I mean, there are drawings done by Dutch explorers of Indians hunting in the Bay Area of San Francisco in the 1540s. The only problem is these Indians have Afro haircuts, black skin, and all the features of Africans. And you're like, huh? What? And then you go look at the giant heads in Guatemala, the African-American heads that are there. I've been there, I've seen them. You're like, huh? What is this? Then you start questioning everything. Did we bring slaves over from West Africa, or were they already here? What were the giant insane asylums that were built in the late 1800s and into the late 1960s, 70s? These giant insane asylums, what were they built for? The thousands and thousands of people were put into these for what? And who were they? What did they do? And how do you determine someone's insane when psychiatry is still, 50 years away from being invented? And so what were the orphan trains? What were these trains full of little kids being taken from Philadelphia, New York, and brought out to the West? Where are their parents? Where did these kids come from? There's literally thousands and thousands of them. Who's doing this and for what reason? And once you start looking into all of this, you realize, man, they've been pulling this, the moon landing stuff, they've been pulling this off for thousands of years.
Yes.
What about the mud flood? What about the mud flood theory? Are you familiar with, of course, the mud flood theory, and what's your opinion?
Well, I mean, to me, it seems incredibly preposterous, but I was in Colorado Springs about 4 months ago, and I was downtown Colorado Springs, and I noticed, two really, really old buildings that were in downtown Colorado. They were like historical, whatever you call it, historical sites. And they were old. And so I said, hey, I'm going to go check this out and get my camera and go check this out and see what I see. So I go, and the first thing I notice is that there's basement windows that are buried 10 feet below the surface of the ground. And you could see that they had to build a concrete enclave to keep the dirt from falling in. And this enclave was fairly new, it wasn't old. And you're like, why would you put a window where when it rains, it's just going to flood into that enclave and pour through the window? I mean, it rains a lot sometimes here. And then I started looking, and I saw that the foundation wasn't level, that there was mud that was going slanting. I thought, you would never do that. I built a house once. I know how to build a foundation. You would never do it slanted like that. Why would they do that? I got my camera out and I started filming, and it just got more and more curious. The more I looked, the more I said, this building got hit by about 10, 15 feet of mud at some point. And so my new theory is that because I've gone out to the American Southwest, to southern Utah and northern Arizona, from the Grand Canyon up to Arches National Park and all those areas, and trying to figure out how those weird rock formations got made. And I've now concluded that, and I believe this is the cause of all the fires too, we get periodically hit by gigantic plasma storms. And I don't know where they come from or how they're generated, but I guarantee you the Grand Canyon is a lightning strike. That's a gigantic lightning strike. It is not done by erosion. And the reason we know that is if it was done by erosion at the very end of the Colorado River where the Gulf of California is, there would be literally tons of debris, right? From all the erosion coming down the Colorado River. So, I mean, that's a lot of erosion. It wouldn't go away quickly, but there's no debris there. And if you fly over the Grand Canyon, which I have, it looks like, if you've ever seen a lightning strike, like hit a golf course or a forest, it looks exactly like what a lightning strike looks like when it hits the earth. And all the 4 inner planets, by the way, have these gigantic canyons that look like they were made by lightning strikes. So my theory is that the Great Fires were these periodic plasma strikes. And is it, you know, is it humans that are doing it, or aliens, or is it natural? I can't answer that. I just find it odd that it hits big cities, right? And so I think what these plasma strikes do is they literally cause the mud, the ground, to become liquefied. It's getting so hot, it causes the ground to liquefy, and it all just goes down to the lowest common place. So Colorado Springs is below the mountains, you know, on the flat plain there. And so it's going to get the mud flood from anything, because it's going to come what? Down, just like everything else. It flows downward because of gravity. So a plasma strike hitting, you know, a couple miles up the mountainside from Colorado Springs would cause the mud to become liquefied and then pour down the mountainside and cover everything up. And by the way, this explains a lot of other things like Indian artifacts. You have to dig down like 4 feet before you start finding them. Why would that be? I mean, you can't tell me 4 feet of mud has happened since, you know, the Native Americans went away 150 years ago. So, you know, there's something to all of this. And I'm going to get to the bottom of it. There's a famous Swedish physicist who teaches at Oxford. He's a physicist, and he was asked one day at a lecture. He said, "You frequently theorize that this place is actually a simulation inside some giant computer somewhere." And he said, "Yeah, I do theorize that." And he said, "Well, is there any way to prove that we're living in a simulation? I mean, you thought about it. Is there any way?" And he says, "Well, yeah, there actually is a way." And the way was that you would think that since the programmers have limited time to do their program of this reality, they're going to spend more time putting the program into the present and to the future and less time in the past. So the concoct of past that makes sort of sense. So I would say, this is the scientist talking, I would say that if you want to find proof if this is a simulation or not, then start looking in the past. And if you start finding anomalies, a lot of anomalies, then that is proof that we're living in a simulation. And I got to tell you, from Autodidactic's channel and John Levy's channel and all the Divergent and all these other guys, I don't agree with all these things that all these guys say, but there's evidence that they present that I have seen, which says, holy crap, there's a shitload of anomalies in our past that we can't explain.
Absolutely. Wow. Any questions,
So,
Angie?
No, I would really like one day to have you back on so we could talk about some more of the alchemy and the stuff like that. That would I would really, that's my jam kind of.
Good. And what you should do is, Angie, is go listen to my reading, because it's a very clear book on what alchemy is and all that. And, you know, and I'll be doing Q&As after every part of the book. So if you know, people can ask questions, and I'm really trying to create alchemical renaissance.
I think that would be amazing, because we do not have the technology now to build the metals like swords and all that like they did in the mid-century.
That's right.
Now we've lost that technology. So
we've lost a lot.
We've lost more than I think we realize.
Yeah.
I truly thank you for being here tonight, and I'm sorry about the hiccup in the beginning.